I shouldn't have come to the charity gala. At 45, standing in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel in Manhattan, I felt like a ghost haunting my own past. The invitation had been addressed to Mrs. Patricia Williams and guest a courtesy title that felt more like pity than respect. My sister Victoria glided through the crowd in her designer gown, diamonds catching the chandelier light like captured stars. She was the successful one, the one who'd married well, the one whose children attended private schools and whose husband's pharmaceutical company sponsored half the events in the city. And there I was, a single mother who'd raised my son David alone after his father walked out when David was 3. Patricia, darling, Victoria's voice carried that practiced sweetness that barely masked her condescension. You look comfortable. Her eyes swept over my off-the-rack black dress, the nicest thing in my closet, purchased from a department store sale 3 months ago. Though I do worry you're becoming rather faded, don't you think? The word hit me like a slap. Faded. As if my worth had an expiration date. As if the lines around my eyes and the gray threads in my hair made me less than. As if working double shifts as a nurse to put David through college had somehow diminished my value as a human being. I forced a smile and excused myself to the ladies' room, not knowing that my 22-year-old son had heard every word, not knowing that he was about to change everything. The months leading up to this gala had been a series of small humiliations disguised as family obligations. Victoria had insisted I attend as her guest, claiming it would be good for me to get out, but every conversation felt like a performance review of my life's failures. You really should consider dating again, Patricia, she'd said during our lunch planning session. Though at your age, you might need to lower your expectations. Perhaps a widower? Someone who won't mind the wear and tear. Her laugh had been light, casual, as if she hadn't just reduced me to damaged goods. The truth was, I'd stopped believing in my own worth somewhere between the sleepless nights when David had pneumonia at age 7 and the second mortgage I'd taken to pay for his pre-med courses. Every sacrifice I'd made for my son had somehow convinced me that I was disappearing, that my identity was solely defined by what I could give rather than who I was. David had graduated summa cum laude from Columbia just 3 months ago, but Victoria had barely acknowledged it. Medical school is so expensive these days, she'd said with fake sympathy. I suppose you'll be working well into your 70s to pay for it all. She'd said it in front of her country club friends, as if my financial struggles were entertainment for their afternoon tea. Standing in that opulent ballroom, surrounded by Manhattan's elite, I felt every year of my 45 years weighing on my shoulders. The other women seemed to float effortlessly in their designer gowns, their faces smooth with expensive procedures, their conversations peppered with references to vacation homes and charity boards I'd never be invited to join. I watched Victoria hold court near the silent auction display, regaling a group of socialites with stories about her latest European vacation. When she gestured toward me across the room, I caught fragments of her words. My poor sister. Never quite recovered from the divorce. Such a shame when women let themselves go. Each word was a needle, precise and poisonous. I'd come here hoping to feel connected to something larger than my small world of hospital shifts and grocery store coupons. Instead, I felt smaller than ever. The evening's program began with the usual parade of speeches from wealthy donors and board members. I sat at table 12, not quite the back of the room, but far enough from the stage to understand my place in the hierarchy. Victoria, of course, was at table 2, right in the spotlight where she belonged. The charity was raising money for pediatric cancer research, and as they introduced the evening's honorees, doctors, researchers, philanthropists, I felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. These were people who changed the world through grand gestures and large checks. What had I ever done that mattered? And now, the MC announced, we'd like to recognize some special guests who embody the spirit of service that makes our work possible. The spotlight began moving through the crowd, highlighting various VIPs and major donors. That's when Victoria struck with surgical precision. As the spotlight swept near our section, she leaned over to her table mates, her voice carrying just far enough for me to hear. You see my sister over there? Poor thing has become such a faded woman. All those years of struggle have just worn her down. It's really quite sad to watch someone give up on themselves like that. The women at her table made sympathetic clucking sounds, their eyes finding me across the room with a mixture of pity and relief that they weren't in my position. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation, my hands trembling as I reached for my water glass. But then something unexpected happened. David, who had been networking near the bar with other young professionals, suddenly appeared beside Victoria's table. I watched in horror as he approached her, certain he was going to cause a scene that would only make things worse. "Excuse me," his voice cut through the ambient chatter, clear and strong. "I couldn't help but overhear you talking about your sister." Victoria's face went pale. She clearly hadn't realized David was within earshot, hadn't considered that her cruel words might have consequences. The women at her table looked between David and Victoria, sensing drama but not yet understanding the dynamics at play. "I think there's something you should know," David continued, his voice growing louder. Watching my son confront Victoria, I felt a war raging inside my chest. Part of me wanted to disappear, to avoid the scene that was clearly about to unfold. For 22 years, I'd taught David to be respectful, to avoid conflict, to take the high road even when others took the low one. Now he was about to defend me in front of Manhattan's social elite, and I was terrified. The other part of me, the part I'd buried under years of exhaustion and self-doubt, was screaming with pride. My son, the boy I'd raised alone, the young man who'd just graduated from one of the world's most prestigious universities, was refusing to let anyone diminish his mother, even me, because that's what I'd been doing, wasn't it? Diminishing myself. Every time Victoria made a cutting remark, I'd absorbed it like a sponge. Every time someone treated me as less than, I'd accepted it as truth. I'd become complicit in my own erasure, so focused on surviving and providing for David that I'd forgotten I was allowed to thrive. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as David stood there, tall and confident in his rented tuxedo. I could see other guests turning to watch, sensing that something significant was happening. The MC had paused mid-sentence, the spotlight frozen somewhere between tables as the room's attention shifted to this unexpected drama. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized this was the moment I'd been avoiding my entire adult life, the moment when staying small was no longer an option. David was forcing the issue, refusing to let me hide in the shadows where I'd convinced myself I belonged. "David, please," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me from across the room. "Don't make a scene." But even as the words formed in my mind, I knew they were wrong. Maybe it was time for a scene. Maybe it was time for someone to speak the truth about who I really was, about what I'd accomplished, about why I deserved better than being called faded by my own sister. The spotlight was about to find us, and there would be nowhere to hide. The tension in the ballroom was electric. Conversations died mid-sentence as guests turned to watch the unfolding drama. Victoria's face had gone from pale to flushed, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide her panic. She clearly hadn't expected to be confronted, especially not by her nephew in front of New York's social elite. "David, sweetheart," she said, her voice strained but attempting to maintain her composure. "This is hardly the place for family discussions." But David wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed to grow taller, more confident with each passing second. "Actually, and Victoria, I think this is exactly the place. You just called my mother faded in front of all these people. You said she'd given up on herself. I think they deserve to know who she really is." The MC, sensing the shift in the room's energy, had stopped speaking entirely. The spotlight operator, confused but intrigued, began slowly moving the light toward the commotion. Other guests were craning their necks, phones discreetly appearing as people sensed they were witnessing something that would be talked about for months. "This is completely inappropriate," Victoria hissed, but her usual authority was cracking. "You're embarrassing yourself and your mother." "No." David's voice rang out clear and strong. "You're the one who should be embarrassed. Do you know what my mother has accomplished? Do any of you know?" He turned to address not just Victoria's table, but the entire section of the ballroom that had fallen silent around them. I could see him from across the room, my son transformed into someone I barely recognized, confident, powerful, unafraid. "My mother worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school while raising me alone," David announced, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. "She's saved more lives than half the people in this room. She's worked double shifts for 20 years, never missing a single one of my school plays or baseball games." Victoria tried to interrupt. "David, really? This isn't she sold her wedding ring to pay for my SAT prep courses," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "She slept on the couch for years so I could have the bedroom with better light for studying. She's the strongest, most selfless person I know, and I'm tired of watching people treat her like she's invisible." The spotlight finally found them, bathing David in brilliant white light as 300 guests held their collective breath. Standing in that spotlight, David looked like a young warrior ready for battle. The entire ballroom had gone silent, even the waiters had stopped moving, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. I could see Victoria's face in the harsh light, her usual composure completely shattered as she realized she'd lost control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," David's voice boomed across the ballroom, no longer just addressing Victoria's table but speaking to everyone. "I want you to meet the most remarkable woman in this room." He turned and pointed directly at me, and suddenly the spotlight swiveled, finding me in my simple black dress at table 12. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a deer caught in headlights. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, to make myself small again. But David wasn't finished. "That's my mother, Patricia Williams," he announced, his voice filled with pride that made my chest ache. "She's a registered nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital. She's worked in the pediatric ICU for 15 years, which means she's probably saved more children's lives than this charity has funded research for." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see people turning in their chairs, craning to get a better look at me. The spotlight felt like fire on my skin, but David's words were like armor, protecting me from my own insecurities. "She put me through Columbia University without taking a single dollar from anyone in this family," David continued, his eyes finding Victoria in the crowd. "She worked Christmas mornings so other nurses could be with their families. She's been volunteering at the Children's Cancer Ward for 10 years, not for tax deductions or social recognition, but because she believes every child deserves someone who cares." The MC had completely abandoned his script, realizing that whatever was happening was far more compelling than the planned program. Cameras were flashing now, phones recording, as Manhattan's elite witnessed something they rarely saw: raw, honest emotion in their carefully curated world. "My mother taught me that success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the designer label on your dress." David's voice cracked with emotion. "It's measured by how many lives you touch, how much love you give, how much of yourself you sacrifice for others." He paused, his eyes finding mine across the crowded ballroom. "Mom, stand up." The words hit me like lightning. Every fiber of my being wanted to shrink back into my chair, to avoid the attention, to let this moment pass. But something in David's voice, the love, the pride, the absolute certainty, gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. Slowly, on trembling legs, I stood. The spotlight blazed down on me, and I could feel 300 pairs of eyes examining me, judging me, seeing me, really seeing me for the first time in years. "She's not faded," David shouted, his voice echoing off the ballroom's crystal chandeliers. "She's not worn down or used up or past her prime. She's my hero. She's my pride." And anyone who can't see that is blind. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone began to clap. Then another person. Then another. Until the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous applause, not polite charity gala applause, but real, genuine recognition of something true and beautiful and rare. The standing ovation lasted for what felt like an eternity. Through my tears, I could see faces in the crowd, some moved to tears themselves, others nodding with recognition, many looking at me with newfound respect. The spotlight had become less harsh somehow, more like a warm embrace than an interrogation light. Victoria had disappeared from her table, unable to face the aftermath of her cruelty being so publicly exposed. But I barely noticed. All I could see was my son, making his way through the crowd toward me, his face radiant with pride and love. When he reached me, he pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. "I'm sorry I waited so long to say that publicly," he whispered in my ear. You deserved to hear it years ago. The evening transformed after that moment. Suddenly, I wasn't the invisible single mother in the corner. I was Patricia Williams, the nurse who'd saved countless children, the mother who'd raised an extraordinary young man, the woman who'd turned sacrifice into strength. People approached me with genuine interest, sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience, thanking me for my service to their community. The charity's director found me during dessert, asking if I'd consider joining their board. We need people who understand what it means to fight for children, she said. People who've been in the trenches, not just writing checks from the sidelines. As the evening wound down, David and I stood on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. You know what the best part of tonight was? He asked. What's that? Watching you remember who you are, he said softly. You're not faded, Mom. You're not worn down. You're refined like gold that's been tested by fire. You're stronger and more beautiful because of everything you've been through, not in spite of it. That night, I learned that being invisible isn't a consequence of aging or struggle or sacrifice. It's a choice we make when we forget our own worth. And sometimes, it takes someone who loves us unconditionally to remind us that we were never meant to fade, we were meant to shine. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt invisible or faded in a world that seems to value youth and wealth above character and sacrifice, remember this: your worth isn't determined by others' recognition of it. You are not defined by your struggles, you are refined by them. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their own strengths today. Subscribe for more stories about finding your voice when the world tries to silence it. Because every woman who has sacrificed, struggled, and survived deserves to be seen not as faded, but as fierce. Not as worn down, but as warrior strong. Sometimes the most powerful moment in our lives is when someone we love refuses to let us disappear.